tell us a bit about your students? I mean, you have got a very rigorous admission process, like harder to get in than Harvard. How do you apply your concepts to your admission criteria, your admission process? And how do you see the students change as they come, from day one?
Good question.
Can we take the other question as well? And then, yeah.
Yeah, so how have you tried to duplicate your methodology across universities, and how receptive have they been to you, and also how are your students different once they come out of the program?
Okay, great.
Yep.
And the third question?
I have a question regarding kind of the dichotomy between like generalists and specialists. It seems like you and your and the school kind of advocate for the generalist education by feeling a lot of, like the jobs kind of, especially at junior levels, position you as a specialist, like doing the same thing again and again, to excellence. So how do you kind of balance that in your education?
Okay, so we'll take.
Is your question related?
Is your question related? I can wait, definitely. Okay, so we wait. So yeah, we'll get to you.
Okay, let me do the generalist specialist thing before I get into these things. So this may surprise you, but I do not believe in the know-nothing generalist. Like, that's yet another big fad. Oh, learn nothing. Just know, I'm a utility player, I can do anything, etc. The reason I don't believe in it is not necessarily because you must become an expert at something, because there are a lot of jobs that don't require expertise in particular things. But every job requires you to understand what expertise is. And if you don't actually generate a level of expertise, then you have a problem in understanding what is expertise when you need to evaluate it or not. Right? There's something that you have to understand when you get to a certain depth of knowledge, right? That when somebody presents you with the idea, then you've got a problem. Now, the idea that you can become a specialist without general knowledge is just simply not true. Right? I'll give you my favorite example. My father is a very, very famous scientist, and not famous in the sense that any of you have ever heard of him, but famous in his field. In his university, he's 80 years old, and he still works 7 days a week and all the rest, but in his university, he is an expert, truly an expert, one of the world's foremost experts in a series of areas, one of which is bioenergetics. And so other PhD students from other labs often come to him for advice. And so one case that is particularly present, and by the way, this is not an aberrant example, unfortunately, 2 PhD students come to him and present to him work that they're collaborating on with a professor that has been working on for 2 years. Explain their hypothesis, show him some of the results, and they're struggling, and they can't get their hypothesis to work. And my father looks at it and he says, well, you do realize that, if your hypothesis is true, then, that would basically disprove Newton's second law. And they say, so? They didn't understand it. All right, and this is even, from a broad perspective, this is like your adjacent thing, right? And the problem is that our world of specialization has limited people's abilities to think, because there is no specialty in the world, right? Show me a CFO who is good, who understands accounting but not finance. And by the way, who doesn't understand how to manage, doesn't understand how to communicate effectively. That CFO does not exist, right? Show me an engineer, right, that doesn't have deep systems thinking, right? That's at the top of their field. Right? Doesn't understand design principles, right? Doesn't understand human factors interaction. You're not going to get to a level of expertise which is transformative. Think of any singular individual in history, any of them. Pick any, justly awarded Nobel Prize winner. Pick any transformative military leader. Pick any entrepreneur or CEO of a company and tell me their single deep skill, right? They may have one or more, but really what made them great is their general knowledge. So deep expertise requires a broad understanding and an ability to integrate that into that expertise. And that's really what we teach. Now, that relates to the nature of our students. So yes, we are extraordinarily selective. Last year, we had 23,000 plus applicants and a 1.2% acceptance rate. So you can see that and say, oh my God, you know, have more applicants than MIT or 4 times harder to get into than Harvard. Of course, you know, what you're getting the same kinds of students that don't even need your education. So it turns out that the students that we have wind up being radically different from a student body perspective than other highly selective universities. So the first aspect is that the way we do admissions is that we don't look at the same factors that other universities look at. I can get into this in greater detail, but the short version is, especially in American admissions processes, but really in the admissions of many elite institutions, almost every question on an application is a question for how rich are mommy and daddy, right? And sometimes how rich is grandpappy, because that also sometimes matters. And the process is, especially in need-blind institutions that don't look at wealth, is massively need-aware and massively discriminatory. And so we basically remove those elements, and despite the fact that we're that selective, our socioeconomic distribution of our students is by far the most diverse of any elite American institution, if not any institution in the world at that level. And why is that? It's because intelligence is broadly distributed, right? It's broadly distributed across the world, across different socioeconomic classes. And the large majority of our students actually require some financial support to be able to come to Minerva, despite the fact that we charge $160,000 US less than a quote-unquote peer institution. So there's the makeup of the students is very different. It's also geographically diverse. Almost every university in the world, at least that I know of, has various quotas for various types of students. So for example, most national universities or universities based in certain nations, 90% of the student body comes from that country, and then they have allocations for students from other countries. We have no such thing. 90% of our students are not from the United States. No single country is 10% of our student body. And that's not by design. It's not because we have quotas. It's not even because we know how many students we're going to have the following year. We accept, despite the fact that we're so selective, we accept 100% of qualified students. 100%. If you're qualified, you're offered a spot at Minerva. And so one year, we may have a class that's twice as big as the other year, right? Another year, we may have a class that's half as big. We don't care, right? We only look for people who we believe can thrive in our environment, and we select them. Yes, they have to demonstrate that they're smart and that they're driven and all the rest, but we really select them, and the thing that makes a Minerva student is that they have a passion and a talent that they have pursued and achieved something that somebody who would be too focused on book learning or narrow path would really have missed in life, right? And we look for those types of characteristics that enable our students, that we believe will enable our students to both thrive in a very, very demanding environment that we provide them, not just academic, but also experiential, living environment. Our students don't come to a campus. They live in a residence hall in the middle of a city, and from their first day, they have to cook for themselves, right? There are no cafeterias. There's no gym attached to the building, right? They live in the real world as adults, and they have 5 hours of homework before their first day of class. Right? And so it is a high stress environment, which is not necessarily what we recommend for every university to do. It's just for the nature of what we do. Now, the way that we expand and broaden what we do is by taking the elements that we believe are universal, a scaffolded curriculum where you introduce habits and concepts in various areas and repeat them structured, a structured way throughout the curriculum, fully active learning that makes sure that people are engaged, right? Having a data-mediated environment where you can actually provide formative feedback for students, which we think every university should be implementing, and we encourage and enable universities to pursue that path. We did that initially by effectively open sourcing what we do. Well, it's not fully open source. The book costs $30, but you can find it used on Amazon sometimes for a little bit cheaper. But we basically published a 400-page recipe book for how anybody can build their own Minerva. Right? We laid out the habits and concepts, we laid out our systems, how we built the technological environment, how we pursue fully active learning, how we even operate the institution if you want to build a brand new institution. It's a recipe book for how to build your own Minerva. And for those institutions that don't want to go through the many steps in the recipe book to build their own, they can actually work with us to implement the Minerva system within their existing context. They can modify the curriculum in any way they want. We're not connected to the way that, because we selected these 80-some habits of mind and foundational concepts doesn't mean that every university should be teaching them. In fact, quite the opposite. We believe that there should be a very diverse set of opportunities for education out there. But we believe that every university should define what having an education from that institution means. I remember I was talking to the dean of a very prestigious business school, speaking of sunk costs, who, unprompted by me, said, I can't tell you that 100% of the students who graduated from this business school know what sunk costs are. And I looked at him and I said, well, I can tell you for a fact that 100% of Minerva freshmen know what it is. Right? And that's not okay. It is simply not okay for an institution to grant a degree truly not knowing what their students, even what the baseline of what their students know. And if there's anything that we should do in this world, if Minerva's mission to nurture critical wisdom for the sake of the world is going to be fulfilled, it is because we are going to give institutions no choice but to declare what they believe are the components of an education and to ensure that their students are educated. That's really the fundamental nature of why we do what we do.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I saw, when I first posted on my LinkedIn that I was, coming on board as a strategic advisor to Minerva, somebody wrote a very interesting comment about, why was I joining such an elitist university? And it was really interesting because, and my response was because Minerva is two things. The first thing is the university, that very elite university itself. And the second thing is Minerva Project, which is actually the arm that kind of owns the IP and the technology and invests in all that sort of thing. Now, Minerva University, that elite institution, is a proof of concept. It's a small, beautiful proof, elegant proof of concept. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's essentially throwing down the gauntlet and saying, I can do it, and so you have no excuse not to do it. And the real mission, which I can sense that you're
messianic about, yes.
I can't pronounce the word, is this beautiful crusade to try to provoke and inspire every university to at least pay $30, buy a copy of that book, and try to shift your calcified thinking. Let some of this good stuff titrate down the various levels, and in a way you are that provocateur of the university world.